So here we have Perry, Scott, and Brian, all from the Fedora ambassador team, to talk to us about immutable Linux desktops with Fedora. All right, let's take it away for the Fedora ambassadors.
Thank you very much, David. Welcome, everybody, to our Exploring Immutable Linux Desktops with Fedora presentation. Glad you can make it. We know that there are other talks that are happening right now, which are based on similar topics. So definitely be sure to check those out, too, when they get recorded as well. That way you'll get the two different perspectives of desktops on this side, as well as desktops over on that side as well. So today we're going to be talking about the automagic of atomic desktops. What business or personal value does this bring for me? It's like, what are these things? And also, what does the enriching history of Silverblue GNOME, Kinoite, KDE, or a Kinoite, there are many different ways to pronounce it, Sway Atomic, formerly Sericea, and Budgie Atomic, formerly Onyx, provide? And what do I need to learn the installation basics? Also, about tooling, what can I do to get started? So what tools will I need? How can I install applications? We'll talk about Flatpak, RPM Austree, and cover key container development tools, including Podman and Toolbox. And also upgrading between different versions of Fedora, how you can help with development, testing for architectures, XYZ, frequently asked questions, Q&A, 10 to 15 minutes, and a thank you. Now, before we continue, I was just wondering, is there anyone new to the topic of atomic desktops? Like, are just here to learn about it? Okay. And how many here are experts? Would you say you've used these quite a bit? Intermediates? Here's your hands. Okay. Just so we can get a general idea of who's here. So what personal or business value does this bring to me? It's like, why should we care? You know? You may be in the camp of how much I actually care, the little sliver, or how much you think I actually care about this. But you really should care, okay? You should care for DevOps folks. This would be useful for you for containerized workflow, consistent tooling across the different installations, predictability across deployments, environment isolation, and scalable. For everybody else, low maintenance of the low maintenance of the operating system and upgrade times. So now we'll be turning over the discussion to Scott here. We'll talk about how and why did we get here.
All right. The truth is that you've all probably used an immutable operating system before and just didn't really think much about it. So I'm going to give some examples about what we mean by immutable. First, a definition. The root storage for the operating system is read-only. That's the most basic definition of an immutable operating system. Right? And this was very common early on in computing. Has anyone played a Sega Genesis before? Did anyone have a Commodore 64? How about like an Atari 400? Ah, VIC-20. My man. So this is an old Commodore 64 that I bought on eBay and did a little soldering and got working again. And so with these, the Commodore 64, you type your program, you mess stuff up. You could even do like a poke 10, which kills the operating system, right? But you restart it, and you're back to where you were every time, right? Advantage, idempotency. That means stuff should work the same way every time. In theory, every Commodore 64, Apple II, Atari 800, and Sega Master System behaved like every other one of the same model. In theory. So this is a very good thing. If you are a hardware developer that wants to do something with a Commodore 64, you want to write software, you have a very good idea that if I buy a Commodore 64 and develop on it, it should work on every other Commodore 64. And sometimes you'd even see disks where they'd have the program on one side for Commodore 64 and the other on an other side was Apple II or Atari. This is a great way if you were a software developer that you had pretty good assurance that your code could work across a bunch of stuff that a lot of people had, so there was incentive to buy it. You had a big market for it. And resiliency, right? If any of you been playing a Nintendo game and you had a little dust on the cartridge and suddenly it glitched out and there's graphics all over the place, you haven't really screwed up your Nintendo because you can restart it again and load the game. You're out your progress, but your Nintendo's okay, right? So you have some resiliency of protecting the OS from the runtime code. None of you have ever had to reinstall an operating system on a Nintendo Entertainment System, right? That's not a thing. And this is practical for cases where you had limited or no storage capabilities at all. For a long time, we didn't have hard drives. And when we did have other storage, they were things like cassette tapes or limited floppy drives, things like that. The downsides, you can't upgrade the operating system. Unless, technically, there were 3 versions of the Commodore 64 kernel, if you could find the other chip and do some soldering. But there's not really a way to swap out a ROM and a board really easily, right? That's a big problem if you have a ROM-based read-only operating system. You're essentially out for upgrading. Or if you did want to upgrade, now you've introduced variants, right? There's like some slight differences in the Commodore 64. Now, could you imagine being sold a DOS or Windows machine that you can never update? How wonderful would that be for security on the age of the internet, right? There was a notable workaround here with CPM, like on the Osborne 1, where they had a ROM on board, but then you could extend it with a floppy. So you did have some creative ways around that. So this is also a very inconvenient thing if you're making lots of files, and then hard drives became a thing. I actually covered 2 slides in one there. Okay, mutable operating systems. Now this is what we all think about now, right? Toshiba laptop. There was a slide here where they talked about all the disks that you need to install Windows on something. Here we go. Here, this is Windows 95 on a Toshiba laptop. So now you can install another operating system, right? And now you can update it if you have a lot of patience. But this came about when we had hard drives now. So the advantage is now you can upgrade or even switch your operating systems. The first DOS-based operating system I had growing up had PC GEOS works on it. And then we also made it capable of running Windows 3.0. So that's a thing. Like you can't you can't run a different operating system on Commodore 64 without adding some kind of other hardware, like they added a Z80 later. And operating system compatibility between computer manufacturers for the first time. That's why the old DOS machines are called IBM compatible. And you can potentially hack the operating system. The disadvantages. Having to reinstall an OS is now a thing. Before the DOS era, we didn't really have to do that very often. There are now more variables to system, software, and hardware compatibility. How often do you have stuff that's put out for Windows that works on some machines and not others? That was a really common problem back then. And the disadvantage, you could potentially hack the operating system. So now the world is actually coming back around to Immutable in some way. Have any of you used a Chromebook before? Who in the audience has an Android phone? Since Android 10, that's Immutable. Project Atomic was an early project with Fedora to do immutable versions of Fedora Linux. By the way, there are QR codes in here, so if there's any point where you're like, I want more information about that, do scan the QR code and then you'll be taken to documentation or a website to help. So the path to immutable Fedora, we start with Austria, which is actually something that GNOME did to give a quick way to test GNOME. So we wanted a quick way that we could just grab the latest version of GNOME and bam, have it on the file system and easily swap that out or go back. It makes testing really easy if I could just check out the newest version of GNOME, revert back to the one I was on, see what the differences were, where the bugs happened. This was initially started as a development testing tool for GNOME. And from that came libaustri. So that's a very important part of Fedora Atomic is this libostree tree having a way of having an immutable part of the file system that you could swap out the images to. And so that got brought into Project Atomic with RPM ostree, and then on top of that, Red Hat purchased CoreOS, which was a Kubernetes-centric distribution. And so then Flatpak also adopted libostree as a way to package containerized desktop applications that were then portable across distributions. And so eventually, all those kind of converged into Fedora Atomic Workstation, which became Silverblue. The Silverblue we all know and love today. Silverblue was coined in 2018. It was formerly called the Atomic Workstation. Now we have several of them called the Fedora Atomic Desktops. The KDE version of that is Fedora Kinoite, which is what I personally run on my workstation in my office at work. There's Fedora Sway Atomic and Fedora Budgie Atomic came out just last year. And more to come. If any of you are interested in bringing your own distribution, please come help us do that. And with that, I'm going to bring it back to Perry.
All right. So next we'll talk about getting started. So to get started, the first steps are to pick a desktop environment. So you want to figure out, do you want to go KDE way, workstation, things like that. So we'll try to demystify that for you. And then also installing an Atomic desktop on your system would be the next step. Install some apps, programs, the things you usually need to get things done. Install it, and then whatever you do beyond that, and then hopefully profit. So we'll see, we'll go from there. So picking a spin. When the sorting hat can't decide, Silverblue. Let's take a look what we have various options here. So the mutable choices originally were Fedora Workstation and a Fedora Budgie. The immutable versions of this are Silverblue and Budgie Atomic, formerly Onyx. For Fedora Sway, if you like working with the command line, you now have Sway Atomic, which was formerly Sericea, and Fedora KDE on the upper right-hand corner would become Fedora Kinoite for the immutable side. Okay. So basically, just browse to this link, or if you take a look at this QR code, you can scan that, and then locate the desktop or desktops you'd like to check out. Feel free to try them all out. There are different choices. If you've never worked with Budgie before, we encourage you to look at Budgie. If you love working with the command line again, take a look at Sway, and then find the ISO file, and away you go. All right, so we'll head on over to tooling here with Brian.
Thank you, thank you. So, talking about tooling, we're talking about different ways to install software that you would normally do, kind of talk about some of the gotchas. So 3 of the primary ways that we're going to look at are these Flatpak, Toolbox, and RPM ostree. So talking about Flatpak, I don't know if you've ever used those before, but the idea is that it's a containerized graphical application. They're intended to be cross-platform, just be easy to install and update, because this containerization, it's easy for third-party vendors or community support. One of the major ways that you can get Flatpaks is through FlatHub. That works out of box with our desktop environments. There are pros and cons to using Flatpaks. It's super easy to get installed and running, and you don't have to reboot to do it. It should work across the same all distros, should being the key portion there. And easy for third parties to have their own support. But the idea is that it's containerized, right? It's secure. It's not doesn't have access to all of your other stuff. The disadvantages is that should doesn't always happen. So, and as a result, because a third party decides they want to ship, an 8-year-old version of SSL or whatever, and all these other libs or dependencies, it could end up taking a lot more space than with like traditional deployments where we might fix that or someone forces them to fix that. And things might not cross-integrate very well because it is containerized, because you do have that security separation. So things like KeyPass, your password manager, that is supposed to work with your desktop app and Firefox may not work the way as intended. The next thing is Toolbox. This for me, like when I first tried Silverblue, was the big gotcha for me because I was like, I just need insert thing here. But the idea with Toolbox is that you're able to run Fedora or RHEL or Ubuntu or Arch Linux environments in a sandbox via Podman, right? So it's kind of similar to WSL if you've used that on Windows. So it's really useful for creating container-centric software development because you have that pristine things, but you can just install things like normal, like you normally would with DNF. So you install RPM Fusion in your toolbox, install your app like you normally would, and bam, it's there. It's on the CLI. Your home folder and other things are mounted into that toolbox container for like those desktop integrations. And DistroBox is a popular alternative, and it's also available. So it's trying to kind of solve the same thing. Advantages: testing, building, running different things for different versions. Makes it really easy for you to do on your laptop without having to like use VMs or other things. You can do that quick DNF install without having to reboot. Your home data is all accessible there, and most of all, because I'm assuming I've definitely done this, right? You accidentally did a sudo pip install of something and totally hosed your Python environment, and then just decided, a reinstall is going to be less work than trying to figure all this mess out. So it's a belt and suspenders, right? It's an extra layer of things, making sure that we don't get caught in a compromised position. Disadvantages: duplications of things. So if you have different toolboxes for different things, you might have to reinstall the same packages across. That obviously would take up more space. GUI apps can be a hit or miss with getting those to work properly. And even though it is in a container and you think, oh, it's in a container, it's safe. It's not entirely safe. Like it says, if you delete your home folder accidentally, you've deleted your home folder. Or if you deleted var, you've just deleted var. And that could put you in a bad spot. So the last thing, RPM Austri with this layering. So the idea is the same thing, that we're going to use these file system layers to install the same as the RPM repos from Workstation. So just like you would do, DNF install Firefox, you could do RPM Austri install Firefox. It still supports third-party RPM repos, so RPM Fusion can still work with RPM Austri. Updates are overlaid along with your regular updates, and we verified that does kind of work out of box. Like when you first install, like what's the first thing I'm making a big assumption, I guess, right? But a lot of times you install a new operating system, you go, all right, let's upgrade all the packages. If you install Silverblue, it's like, oh, we can't upgrade the packages because we're upgrading the packages for you. And so it kind of does that out of box. It's really great. But generally, to get all of these updates to work, you do have to do a reboot. So that is going to be required. There is a flag that you can use called Apply Live, and it's hit or miss. It might work. It might not. So that's just where it is. But it's really useful at the host level for doing things like drivers, libvirt, and cockpit. Advantages, disadvantages about using RPM Austri. The install the same packages as the Workstation out of the box. The third-party RPM repo support. You enable host level features like cockpit or libvirt, and it becomes that immutable part of the image. Disadvantages, generally, you're looking at a reboot to do it. Package conflicts are rare, but they're not very fun to fix. And likewise, doing a downgrade or an uninstall requires a reboot, which, depending on your context or your workflows, may be a make or break situation. What's nice, most of us are able to, reboot our machine a couple of seconds, unless you're running like server grade hardware. And then all of a sudden it's, 6 minutes, because that's just what it is. Other ways to get software, you can still use Podman, you use containers, you can use an app image. You can also use Nix via, which is Ublue, or Snap. There is some extra tinkering that's required. That's via Fleek. It's a tool that kind of binds in. Both Snap and Nix are expecting a folder to exist that is writable inside of root, and so that's what Fleek helps do, make sure that it has a place to store things as expected. But for the most part, you can get it to work. There's just some extra steps, some extra little tweaks you'll have to do, so it doesn't quite work out of box. Yeah. And then there's upgrading between different Fedora versions. This is actually one of my favorite parts. That QR code is to our official docs. What's really nice is that when we're talking about major upgrades, Fedora 40 is about to hit. A lot of people I know are excited about the new Plasma 6 that's coming out for the KDE. But functionally, this works just like any other update, right? It's downloading all the new image layers and to make that immutable, and it's just doing a reboot like it normally does. RPM Austri, yep. And so if Fedora, when I first started with Fedora, it was like hit or miss, right? It was like you had a 50-50 shot of upgrading from Fedora 15 to Fedora 16. It's just how it was. Like there's no beating around that bush. It's gotten a lot better. Like I was able to upgrade from 30 to 39, without doing any reinstalls. But sometimes those reboots, it just takes a while. But with this, you've downloaded it. It's like, all right, go ahead and reboot, and then 30 seconds later, you're there. You're done. And that part is really, really beneficial. You can trigger this through your desktop environment. Like GNOME will say, hey, there's a new version of Fedora. Do you want to download and install it? And you say yes. Or you can trigger it through the CLI. I just did this kind of to show, hey, this was Fedora 38. And you do an upgrade first, obviously, because you always have to upgrade, make sure you get the best compatibility. And then after that, you're going to grab these remote references. And there's too many. Because as you can see, there's all these different versions. Okay, well, let's try this again and just grab the 39 versions. That's the version I want. And, okay, I see the Silverblue that's there. I'm going to copy it, paste it in. You're going to do RPM Austri rebase to that reference. You can see me struggling to type and tab complete. It's all fun. And you run that. It downloads all the stuff. And at the end of it, it says, hey, you've got to reboot to complete this. Run, system control, reboot. And you do. And you boot into Fedora 39. And it's easy as that. It's super, super simple. But as always, there's always times where things don't go as expected, and you have to revert. So then, what do you do? What are our options? So the first one you can do is the temporary fix, right? At boot, just like you used to be able to select a different kernel, you can select a different version. So here you can kind of see, it may be a little small. There's different Fedora versions that are actually listed here, right? So it's oh no, I was on Rawhide and I want to go back to Fedora 39. Or I was on Fedora 39, I want to go back to 38. So you can just pick it from the grub menu as you reboot, and you're back, right? The more permanent way of doing it is like logging into the terminal, running RPM mastery rollback, and it restages, rebuilds the tree, you're done, right? But what's really nice is this also works between different, as you saw, like there was 39 for Silverblue and for Kinoite. I don't know if you've ever tried to reinstall a new desktop environment, like on top of another one, to try to have both. It's an adventure, for sure. Like, that's kind of putting in my odd things, strange things happen, and you don't always know why, especially like subsequent updates after that. Like, you're like, hey, I was booting into KDE. Why am I looking at the GNOME login? I don't understand what's going on. This helps you do that really cleanly. So if you're ever interested in like jumping into newer versions, or yeah, I want to run, do some rawhide and do some testing stuff, but it's such a pain and I have to find another box to do it, like this solves part of that problem. Hey, I want to try Kinoite, but maybe I don't like it. This solves that problem. And you're just like a reboot away from getting back to where you were. And keeping those different trees clean with their own images and stuff, it's really, really great. So, yep. And then next, we're Scott.
Yep. So, as you know, Fedora is the upstream for a lot of things. And the other thing is we work upstream with a lot of things. So, doing RPM Austree, being involved in those kind of things, those are upstream. But then you might think of downstream as like there's Red Hat Enterprise Linux, there's CentOS, things like that. One of the cool things about Fedora is that it's meant to be a good upstream. And there are ways to take these images that we have and do cool things with it and make your own distribution of Fedora, essentially. I'm not a lawyer, so maybe don't call it Fedora if you do. But there's a group. Are any of you here from Universal Blue? Excellent. They have done some amazing stuff with Fedora. And so you could take Silverblue, you could take Kinoite, you could take these and use their tools to then extend it and essentially make your own distribution of it. So there's two ways to do it. I want to see who has done like a Docker file or a container file before. See what? Wow, almost everyone. Guess what? You can all be Fedora hackers. Because we have the universal tools, they use OCI-based image changes so that you can make your own custom version of Fedora if you're familiar with doing container development before. And this is a new one that came out, I just found out about like a week or two ago. I don't know how old it actually is, but it's called Blue Build. And this is a different way to do it. If you've never done like Docker container file stuff before, then there's a different way to do it with YAML. So now you could use YAML definitions. So if you're someone that's like maybe used to NixOS, maybe this is going to be a little more familiar for you. So these are ways, let me give you an example of why you might do this. This is something that I've been thinking about in my professional life. I work at University of California, and we've had lab environments that have RStudio on them. And if you've ever worked with something like Python or RStudio, you know it's really easy for a student to go in there, well-meaning, update some libraries. That machine's now on fire for every other student that might have wanted to use it, right? And so if you're doing Windows, you have to have this continuous, like you're continuously reinstalling Windows so that you can hopefully have some kind of an idempotent environment ready for the next student and to clean off whatever the last students left behind. So if we could extend Fedora with Kinoite so it looks enough like Windows, have RStudio on it, now we have all of our lab machines being exactly like without having to reinstall every single time. They're all getting the exact same update streams across the board. So that's a hopeful thing that I have as a plan in my back pocket for what to do with this in my personal life. So if you're a sysadmin and you're like, man, I need all of these machines to act in a similar, predictable way, this is a way to do that very easily. There are also downstream distributions that Universal Blue has done, including Bluefin and Bazite, And the one I want to talk about just because it's the most exciting to me is Bazite, because it makes gaming on Fedora even better, which I didn't know was possible. Do any of you do gaming on Fedora or Linux in general? Awesome. I do too. My other laptop's an MSI Alpha, and I'm a fan of Lutris. I do Steam stuff. I do Epic. And what Bazite does is they take Fedora, which is already excellent for gaming, and they make it even better because they'll bring in drivers for things that don't come with Fedora out of box, and some stuff that's out of band in the kernel, like the new Xbox driver stuff hit Bazite first. So I have an 8-bit DOT controller, and some of the drivers for it took a while to get mainline in the kernel for all the fixes and stuff, and Bazite goes ahead and incorporates extra game controller drivers in it. It's really awesome. And they'll also do stuff that's hardware specific. Someone came by the Fedora booth, I think it was Friday, with a Steam Deck running Fedora, and they have stuff for, oh, look at that! And they have stuff for the Asus handheld as well. So when the Asus ROG came out, they had this really awesome Ryzen 7 based like handheld gaming thing. It was like the Steam Deck on steroids. The problem is it had one major flaw. Everyone said this is the major flaw with it. It came with Windows. And Windows on a little handheld just sucks. So this is a way that you could get Fedora on it. And it's awesome, the work that they're doing. They have stuff for Microsoft Surface stuff. So if you're doing Microsoft Surface and you just want Fedora to work out of the box, they're doing some really awesome stuff here. So definitely check Universal Blue Tools out. Perry, would you like to talk about development stuff?
So folks, one of the key questions that is asked of us is, how can I help with this project if I have some coding or development skills? So we do have some special interest groups. Here are the links, and if you feel free to scan these with your QR readers there. Cosmic, which is very early, but feel free to check that out too. You can also help with testing and support for non-x86 architectures as well. Other ways is testing or bug reporting. Anytime you find any type of defects, we could always use a hand in identifying those, so that way we can improve the experience for others. And also helping with the desktop environment development system upstream. And finally, encourage others to try the various atomic desktops. Remember, you're not just limited to just one or two of these. There are very many choices, because we do know that everybody works in different types of environments and needs to provide solutions. Here are two different QR codes that we'd like to point you out to for various frequently asked questions that are available. At the end of the slide presentation, we'll give you some information too on how to access our presentation later, so that way you can scroll back through these and take a look at the QRs. So don't worry about that. So one of the main questions that's asked of us is, so what's next for Immutable? Is everything going the way of Silverblue or Kinoite? Well, Fedora is going to continue to grow in this space, as far as we can see, for the foreseeable future. Regular Fedora workstation, KDE, etc., is not going away. And Fedora Core OS and Fedora IoT, Internet of Things, for servers and embedded. Another question that's asked of us is, why are some of these spins on Fedora project org atomic desktops named Atomic, and some are not? Well, naming things is hard. So maybe we'll eventually catch up, and there will be consistency in that. So, but we do recognize that. Another question that's asked of us is, AI is pretty popular. Could Immutable facilitate AI in some way? The tools aren't completely open source, so we do recognize that. So Fedora Core OS would be a better place for that as far as we can see. So ultimately, it depends on the use case. And so it also depends on at scale as well. Are there any good websites, books, videos on learning more about Immutable Linux? Browse the various atomic desktops. That's the best way to just learn about things and check it out. And then also the documentation is on the upper left-hand corner of each individual desktop image. If you look very carefully, there is a button that says documentation. Feel free to browse that. It's very helpful there, but if there's anything that needs to be clarified, definitely report that as a support issue. Then we'll try to clear that up. And then what are some of the gotchas to look for, like stuff that can cause data loss, security issues, etc., relating to Immutable. So in Toolbox, the home is mounted by default. So if you delete stuff in your Toolbox home, you've deleted your actual home. So do be careful about that. And it's also possible to install Firefox Chrome through Flatpak. However, some browser extensions like KeePassXC won't work via Flatpak. And also dual OS boot can be more complicated. So what's popular? What should I use? Well, Silverblue and Kinoite are more established at the moment, but try them out. You know, there are various choices once again. So if you have some extra time there, feel free to experiment. So I have more questions. Where can I ask them? We have various opportunities. We have on Matrix, you have chat.fedoraproject.org. Feel free to discuss over on discussion.fedoraproject.org, or stop by our booth after the conclusion of this talk at booth 110. And so that concludes our presentation. Are there any questions? Yeah, we'll be.
Yes, we're going to make sure that that there's either
Yeah.
a QR code or that it'll be linked actually in the other thing. I'm going to walk around and just repeat questions just so y'all don't have to feel like y'all are yelling. So, but yes, the slides will be up.
Ah. Okay, yes, this is a great question. He asked, what's the relationship between RPM S-Tree and Btrfs snapshots? Are you a SUSE user? Okay,
Yes.
This is a relevant question. If you've used Aeon or Kalpa, SLE Micro, OpenSUSE Leap transaction server, this is a very good question to ask because this is how they achieve something similar through very different tools. They're using Btrfs, they're leveraging Btrfs snapshots to do that. This is different. However, I could tell you where this becomes really useful for RPM OSTree. So we do ship Btrfs by default, but that's not the mechanism that we're using in this case to go from one image to the other. But where this becomes useful is crypto locking. So a crypto locker is not going to get your root OS in this case because it's read-only. However, if you're using Btrfs snapshots, this is really great. If you get crypto locked, you just revert back to the snapshot before they encrypted your stuff and you move on with your life. So that's a really cool thing, like from just like a general computer being on the internet, way to protect yourself. So we definitely leverage Btrfs in different ways, but it doesn't work quite the same way as the SUSE transactional stuff.
Follow-up question on that. Sorry. Yeah. So in that case, as you mentioned, you leverage Btrfs snapshots. I'm assuming that's like home directory and like minor things, not system level rollbacks.
Yeah. So it works essentially the same way as on Workstation, right? On Workstation, you could snapshot your root or your home, and on Workstation, home is just a subvolume of root by default. And so you can have snapshots at the root level or home level. The difference is on Silverblue, there's not a need to have a snapshot at the root level because it's immutable, it's already in the image. So having a snapshot of the root, you already have that in that it's already a read-only. A snapshot is just going to give you what you already have. So you only need to worry about focusing on snapshotting the home, which could mean that you have smaller snapshots now, because you only need to snapshot one part of that in Silverblue or Kinoite.
Any other questions?
So one of the laptops that I own has one of those quirky little Linux things where you need to like install a special kernel module for the webcam to work.
Yep.
You know, so how would that sort of modification work if your operating system is immutable?
So this is where hopefully they ship it as an RPM, because then you'll be good. Because like third-party drivers like NVIDIA, like if you were to install Budgie Atomic, it has to go do third-party drivers, and I'll bring in the RPM Fusion NVIDIA repo, and if it's in RPM Austri, it'll just get layered in, and you reboot, and you'll just have the drivers. I don't think DKMS will work. I'm not sure, but I'm 70% sure DKMS doesn't work. But as long as the drivers could be shipped in RPM, it should work.
So as a follow-up question, if you have kernel boot parameters,
Yeah.
same question.
Yeah, you can still update. So Etsy itself, you will still persist changes. Now there is a little bit of a difference. This is going to matter if you're like a regular laptop user, but if you're like a sysadmin and you want to know like what the Apache user is or something like that, you might find it weird that Etsy password is pretty empty. It's because a lot of that stuff is moved to user. And so some of that stuff will be in user, and Etsy is kind of sort of an overlay on user now. So don't be surprised if stuff in Etsy looks a little more bare bones than you're used to seeing it. But you can still edit stuff that's in Etsy, and that'll persist between boots.
One last question. Oops, sorry. Yeah, so let's say if you're using this in an enterprise environment where you're deploying this on 100, 200 workstations, again, in enterprise environments, vendors offer sometimes RPM packages. Internally, within the company, within the enterprise environment, does it make more sense to have your own Austri, I guess, or your own repository, or does it make more sense to package that RPM as a flat pack to distribute to your environment?
Okay, so he asked if you're doing this at scale and you have like a desktop application, I assume, does it make more sense to package that in RPM or Flatpak? Both, I guess. Either one are viable in that case. The thing with Flatpak, if you're doing a desktop, I'll say there are two advantages to do it the Flatpak way, in that it won't be specific to Fedora and a Fedora version. So if you also, for example, if you're deploying Fedora and Ubuntu, Ubuntu is a bad example. Let's say Fedora and OpenSUSE, or Pop! OS. We'll go Pop! OS. And you want to have a common package path for both of those, Flatpak is going to be better. If you're doing immutable, the thing with RPM Austri, you still have that limitation of you're pretty much guaranteed to have to reboot to get the update, and that's something you don't have to worry about with Flatpak. So Flatpak might take up more space, but if you're using Flatpak more, that hit is less because they have shared runtimes, right? So there'll be like a GNOME 45 runtime, and any Flatpak that's built off that 45 runtime will reuse that layer that's already there. So there is some limiting of that of those duplications.
Yeah, I would also say that because of Fedora's 6-month release cycle, that might be another driver for not wanting to rebuild everything every 6 months. I mean, I guess if you're already invested with like a Jenkins server or something and you just need to integrate it once and it just builds it for you, maybe not. But outside of that, I mean, that's another good reason, I think, to go with Flatpak.
And I'm not trying to talk you out of RPM either. They're both supported. I hear people all the time on Mastodon say, well, RPMs aren't really supported on this. It's your system. Don't let someone on Mastodon tell you what to do or not on that. So if you want to install the RPM Austri, do it.
Any other questions? Yes?
You have
a question? Okay. Just kidding. Just put you on the spot. I mean, you have a question, don't you? No, I'm just kidding. One more. Okay.
I'm working on it.
The QR code will we'll either make sure that our slide deck is embedded on the scale talk on the scale page, or we'll edit it to include a QR code with a link to download it.
Yeah.
Or you can come by the booth, and if you have a flash drive, I'll just give it to you.
Yeah.
So that too. That works too. You know, all the things.
All right, any other questions? All right.
I'll just say one more quick thing. This isn't all of Fedora Immutable. There's also Fedora CoreOS and Fedora IoT if you're going to run on servers. So if you're used to Ignition and or you want to run like your own OpenShift in a home lab or something, Fedora CoreOS is really good for that. If you want something that's maybe closer to like imagining if Fedora server acted a little closer to Silverblue, then you might check out Fedora IoT.
Thank you, everyone. All right. So could you tell us again where can we find the Fedora booth?
The Fedora booth is in the expo hall, like we're on the left wall when you walk in, about a third of the way down on the left wall when you walk in. And we'll update the presentation page on the Scale website with the slides.
Thank you again.